Into the Crimson Valley, the transport ship Stellar Unity cut through space toward Kepler 442c like a blade through dark silk. Inside its reinforced hull, 15 soldiers from across the galaxy prepared for what many considered a suicide mission. The planet below glowed with an ominous red light, its surface scarred by deep valleys that had claimed the lives of countless explorers. Commander Veltar stood at the front of the briefing room, his scaled green skin catching the harsh artificial light. The reptilian officer's yellow eyes swept across his assembled team with practiced authority. Behind him, a holographic display showed the target location, the Crimson Valley, a jagged wound in the planet's crust that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. The ancient predecessor artifacts are located deep within this valley. Veltar's voice hissed through his translator. Intelligence suggests these relics contain technology that could advance our civilizations by thousands of years. Energy weapons, faster-than-light communication, maybe even the secrets of immortality. The soldiers listened with varying degrees of interest. Lieutenant Zara, her energy-form body crackling with blue electricity, leaned forward eagerly. Crix, the team's insectoid scientist, cleaned his compound eyes with precise movements of his 4 arms. The other 11 elite warriors represented the best fighters from their respective species, crystalline beings who could manipulate matter, gas-form creatures that could phase through solid objects, and cybernetic-enhanced soldiers with reflexes. Faster than light dot at the back of the room, almost forgotten, sat Sarah Martinez. The human woman looked decidedly ordinary compared to her alien teammates. She wore the same combat gear, but her role was listed simply as Nutritional Support Specialist, the team cook. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her brown eyes held a quiet intelligence that most of the others had already dismissed. The valley has claimed every expedition sent there over the past century, Veltar continued. 73 separate teams, over 400 of the galaxy's best soldiers, scientists, and explorers. None returned. However, recent satellite imaging suggests the artifacts remain intact within the central ruins. A Zirian warrior, his rock-like hide covered in battle scars, raised a massive fist. What makes this mission different, Commander? We're only 15 soldiers. Previous expeditions had hundreds. Veltar's teeth showed in what might have been a smile. We are not hundreds of average soldiers. Each of you represents the peak of your species' military evolution. Enhanced reflexes, advanced weaponry, superior tactical training. We will succeed where others failed through precision and overwhelming individual capability. Sarah quietly reviewed her equipment manifest on a small tablet, while her teammates carried plasma rifles, energy shields, and molecular disruptors. Her pack contained field rations, water purification tablets, basic medical supplies, and a collection of simple cooking implements. She had requested to study the valley's ecosystem and potential food sources, but her requests were denied. The mission timeline allowed for only 72 hours on the surface. The descent to Kepler 442c took 6 hours. As they broke through the atmosphere, the transport shuddered against fierce winds laden with metallic particles. Through the viewports, the Crimson Valley spread below them like an infected wound. Red-orange rock formations jutted from the valley. Floor and strange vegetation created patches of sickly green against the rust-colored landscape. Atmospheric analysis complete, announced Dr. Crix, his mandibles clicking nervously. Oxygen levels sufficient for most species, but the air contains high concentrations of sulfur compounds and unknown organic particles. Recommend full environmental. Suits for the first phase of exploration. The transport touched down on a relatively flat plateau overlooking the valley's entrance. As the ramp lowered, a wave of humid, metallic-tasting air rushed into the ship. The smell was overwhelming, like copper mixed with rotting vegetation and something else. Something alive and watching. Sarah was the last to exit the transport. While the others checked their weapons and activated their various technological enhancements, she stood quietly at the valley's edge, observing. The alien landscape seemed hostile at first glance, but her trained eye noticed subtle patterns. The strange plants grew in specific clusters, their roots following underground water sources. Small creatures darted between the rocks, suggesting a complex ecosystem that had adapted to the harsh conditions. Formation Alpha 7, commanded Veltar. Crix maintain central position for scanning. Energy forms take point positions. Heavy. Combat units protect the flanks. The nutritionist stays with the rear guard. They moved into the valley in a precise military formation. Each soldier's armor gleamed with advanced technology, and their weapons hummed with barely contained energy. Sarah walked near the back, her simpler gear making her feel like a child among giants. The first sign of danger came 20 minutes into their march. Lieutenant Zara, scouting ahead in her energy form, suddenly screamed and collapsed to the ground. Her normally brilliant blue glow dimmed to a weak flicker, as strange red veins spread across her energy matrix. Dr. Crix rushed to her side, his sensors whirring frantically. Unknown pathogen attacking her energy structure. It's like nothing in our databases. Her molecular cohesion is destabilizing. While the team formed a protective circle, Sarah knelt beside the fallen soldier. She noticed small spores floating in the air around a cluster of red plants nearby. The spores moved against the wind, almost purposefully, and seemed to be drawn to sources of energy. "Commander," Sarah said quietly, "I think those plants release spores that feed on electrical energy. If we avoid the red flowering clusters and stay near the blue-leafed vegetation, we might be safer." Veltar barely glanced at her. Dr. Crix stabilized Zara with a containment field. "We'll adapt our energy signatures to repel the pathogen. Continue forward." They left Zara behind in a protective medical pod, their first casualty within an hour of entering the valley. Sarah looked back at the unconscious energy being and felt a knot of worry in her stomach. Her suggestion about the plant patterns had been ignored, but she continued to observe and take mental notes. The valley seemed to respond to their presence with increasing hostility. Crystalline soldiers found their matter manipulation abilities disrupted by strange mineral deposits in the rock. Gas form warriors discovered that the valley's atmosphere contained particles that made their phase abilities unreliable. Even the cybernetic enhanced soldiers began experiencing system malfunctions as the environment somehow interfered with their technological implants. By the third hour, they had lost 4 more team members. A Gorian heavy trooper fell into what appeared to be solid ground, but turned out to be a perfectly camouflaged pit filled with acid. 2 Nexian phase walkers became trapped when their abilities failed while passing through a rock formation, leaving them partially materialized inside solid stone. A crystalline manipulator simply vanished when her matter form became dispersed, and she couldn't reassemble. Sarah watched each casualty with growing concern. The valley wasn't just hostile. It was intelligent. The traps and dangers seemed specifically designed to counter each species' advantages. The acid pit was too perfectly positioned for the Gorian's heavy gate. The rock trap activated only when phase abilities were in use. The dispersion field targeted matter manipulation specifically. "Commander," she tried again during a brief. "Rest stop. The valley seems to be adapting to our abilities. Maybe if we approached it differently, the nutritionist will maintain silence unless directly asked for input." Veltar snapped, his stress showing through his rigid military bearing. "Your expertise is limited to food preparation. Leave tactical decisions to trained warriors." By nightfall, only 8 soldiers remained from the original 15. They made camp in a defensive circle, their advanced weapons pointing outward into the darkness. Strange sounds echoed from the valley depths, howls, screeches, and something that sounded disturbingly like laughter. Sarah volunteered for the first watch, though her offer was met with skeptical looks from the surviving team members. As the others settled into their high-tech sleeping pods, she sat quietly at the edge of their camp, eating a simple meal of field rations and observing the valley's nighttime behavior. The darkness revealed wonders that daylight had hidden. Bioluminescent plants created patterns of light that seemed almost like writing. Nocturnal creatures moved with purpose rather than random animal behavior. Most remarkably, she noticed that the most dangerous areas from their day's march now showed clear warning signs, subtle color changes in vegetation, different sound patterns, even changes in air movement. Asterisk. The valley wasn't just intelligent. It was trying to communicate. The dangers they had faced weren't random traps, but warnings, like a mother animal protecting her young by displaying threat behavior before attacking. Sarah realized that every casualty had occurred when the team ignored or missed these natural warning signs. As dawn approached, she made a decision that would change everything. When Commander Veltar announced the plan to split into smaller teams to cover more ground, Sarah quietly volunteered to stay behind and guard their base camp. The others agreed readily, relieved to leave the useless human cook in relative safety while they pushed deeper into the valley's mysteries. They equipped her with basic communication gear and emergency supplies, then departed in 3 groups of 2 soldiers each, leaving Sarah alone with their extra equipment and her own growing understanding of the valley's true nature. For the first time since entering the valley, she felt something unexpected: hope. While her teammates relied on superior technology and overwhelming force, she would try a different approach. She would listen to what the valley was trying to tell them, and maybe, just maybe, she would be the first to understand its ancient secrets. Asterisk. The cook's triumph. 3 weeks passed without any communication from the scattered teams. Sarah's emergency beacon remained silent, following the mission protocol to maintain radio silence unless faced with immediate evacuation needs. But as the days stretched on, she realized that her teammates were likely never coming back. Instead of panic, Sarah felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in her military career, she could work without someone dismissing her observations or relegating her to meal preparation duties. The valley, she discovered, was not the hostile wasteland that mission briefings had described. It was a complex ecosystem with its own rules and rhythms, and those rules made perfect sense once you learned to read them. Her first breakthrough came on day 4. While preparing her evening meal, she noticed small creatures watching her from the rocks, 6-legged lizard-like animals with intelligent golden eyes. Instead of hiding her food or driving them away, Sarah placed small portions of her prepared rations near their hiding spots. The creatures, which she named Valley Sprites, approached cautiously. They sniffed the food, tasted it carefully, then made soft chirping sounds that seemed almost like approval. Within days, they were bringing her gifts, unusual fruits, edible roots, and most importantly, safe passage through areas that had been deadly to her armored teammates. Sarah's background in nutritional science proved invaluable. She could identify which plants were safe to eat, which ones had medicinal properties, and which ones were sending chemical warning signals to avoid. Her cooking skills let her prepare valley foods in ways that were not only safe, but actually enhanced their nutritional and medicinal benefits. The Valley Sprites became her guides and protectors. They led her away from dangerous areas during her daily explorations and showed her hidden water sources and shelter spots. In return, she prepared foods that they couldn't process themselves, creating a symbiotic relationship that benefited both species. By the second week, larger creatures began to take interest in the unusual human. A family of 6-armed bear-like animals, each the size of a small transport vehicle, started following her at a distance. Sarah named the largest one Gentle Giant, and began leaving prepared foods at the edge of their territory. The breakthrough came when she discovered that these massive creatures were actually highly intelligent herbivores, not the vicious predators that military intelligence had classified them as. They were simply protective of their valley home and responded to perceived threats with appropriate force. When Sarah approached with respect and offering rather than weapons and demands, they welcomed her like a long-lost family member. Gentle, Giant became her constant companion, a living mountain of fur and muscle who could clear paths through dense vegetation and protect her from the valley's few genuinely dangerous creatures. More importantly, the bear creature seemed to understand that Sarah was seeking something specific and began guiding her toward the valley's deepest, most protected areas. On day 18, Gentle Giant led her to a hidden canyon within the main valley system. The walls were covered with the same bioluminescent writing she had noticed during her first night, but here the patterns were more complex, more purposeful. At the center of the canyon stood a structure that took her breath away. Predecessor ruins were not the ancient, crumbling buildings that archaeological reports had suggested. They were living architecture, constructed from the same materials as the valley's native plants, but shaped into impossible geometric forms that seemed to shift and flow like liquid crystal. The buildings pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns, creating a symphony of light and color that spoke directly to some deep part of her consciousness. As Sarah approached the central structure, accompanied by Gentle Giant, in a procession of valley sprites, the building responded to her presence. Doorways opened like flowers blooming, revealing chambers filled with objects that were clearly the artifacts her team had come to retrieve. But these were not weapons or tools of conquest. They were instruments of harmony, devices designed to facilitate communication between species, to enhance understanding rather than dominance. There were translation matrices that could interpret not just languages, but emotional states and cultural contexts. Healing devices that worked by exhilarating natural recovery processes rather than forcing artificial changes. Agricultural tools that enhanced soil and plant health rather than depleting resources for short-term gains. In the deepest chamber, Sarah found what appeared to be the building's central intelligence, not a computer or artificial construct, but a living entity that existed as pure organized consciousness within the building's bioarchitectural matrix. The entity communicated through the bioluminescent patterns, and Sarah realized with wonder that she could understand its messages. Valley was not just a habitat. It was a preserve, a living museum created by the predecessors to protect and nurture the development of younger civilizations. Every species that entered the valley was tested, not for their ability to take what they wanted by force, but for their capacity to give, to nurture, to find harmony with systems larger than themselves. The military teams had failed because they approached the valley as conquerors rather than guests. Their advanced weapons and superior technologies were meaningless when faced with challenges that required wisdom, patience, and respect for natural order. Sarah had succeeded not despite being just a cook, but because her entire profession was built around taking raw materials and transforming them into something that nourished others. The entity showed her the fate of her teammates through shared consciousness experiences. They had pushed deeper into the valley's protected areas, triggering increasingly severe defensive responses. Their advanced equipment had been systematically disabled by targeted biotechnological countermeasures. They had died not from malicious attacks, but from their own inability to adapt to an environment that operated by different rules than the ones they knew. Asterisk. Commander Veltar had made it the furthest, reaching within sight of the ruins before being overcome by spores that induced a deep, peaceful sleep. He was still alive, preserved in a bio-cocoon deep within the valley's protective systems, along with Dr. Crix and the two other survivors. They could be awakened and restored to health, but only if they agreed to approach the valley and its treasures with the same respect that Sarah had shown. Sarah spent her remaining days learning from the entity and preparing for her eventual rescue. The consciousness taught her how to interface with predecessor technology, not as a user exploiting tools, but as a partner working with living systems. She learned techniques for enhancing plant growth that could revolutionize agriculture across the galaxy. She discovered healing methods that could cure diseases that had plagued various species for millennia. Most importantly, she learned principles of interspecies cooperation that could prevent the wars and conflicts that had dominated galactic history. When the rescue ship arrived on schedule, they found Sarah waiting at the extraction point with a collection that would change the course of galactic civilization. But the most remarkable sight was her companion. Gentle Giant had insisted on coming with her, forming a bond that transcended species barriers. The rescue team's captain, a veteran Altarian explorer named Jorix, stared in disbelief at the massive creature lounging peacefully beside the small human woman. "Student Martinez, where is your team? And what is that creature doing here?" Sarah stood calmly, one hand resting on Gentle Giant's massive shoulder. "My teammates are safe, but will need medical attention. They're being preserved by the Valley's protective systems until we can arrange proper extraction procedures. As for my friend here, his name is Gentle Giant, and he's volunteered to serve as an ambassador between the Valley Preserve and the galactic community." The rescue team approached cautiously, weapons ready, but Sarah held up a hand. "Please, no weapons. Gentle Giant responds to threat displays the same way you would, with appropriate defensive action. He's here by choice, not as a prisoner or trophy." As if to demonstrate, the massive creature rose to his full 3-meter height, stretched languidly, then settled back down beside Sarah with a sound that might have been contentment. Several rescue team members stepped backward, but Sarah remained completely relaxed. "The artifacts we came for are here," she continued, gesturing to several containers of unusual materials. "But they're not what Command expected. They're gifts, not conquests. The predecessors created this valley as a teaching preserve designed to help younger species learn principles of sustainable development and interspecies cooperation." Captain Jorix examined the containers with professional interest. "These materials are unlike anything in our databases. The energy signatures alone could advance our understanding of biotechnology by centuries. There's much more available," Sarah said, "but it requires a different approach than traditional archaeological extraction. The Valley's guardian consciousness is willing to share its knowledge, but only with species that demonstrate genuine commitment to using that knowledge for nurturing rather than domination." The journey back to the orbital station took on the character of a diplomatic mission rather than a rescue operation. Sarah spent the transit time preparing reports that would fundamentally change how the galactic community approached first contact, protocols, and archaeological exploration. Her recommendations emphasized patience over urgency, cooperation over conquest, and long-term sustainability over short-term advantage. Gentle Giant adapted to spacecraft life with remarkable ease, demonstrating intelligence that rivaled most sentient species and a gentle nature that won over even the most skeptical crew members. The creature seemed to understand that he was serving as an ambassador and conducted himself with appropriate dignity. When they arrived at the orbital station, word of Sarah's success had already spread through unofficial channels. The human who had been dismissed as support personnel had achieved what elite military units could not. She had not only survived the deadly valley, but had established the first successful diplomatic contact with predecessor technology. The debriefing sessions lasted for weeks. Military commanders struggled to understand how their most advanced soldiers had failed while a nutritional specialist succeeded. Scientists marveled at the biological samples and technological artifacts Sarah had brought back. Diplomats worked to establish protocols for the cultural exchange programs that Sarah recommended. But perhaps the most significant change was philosophical. Sarah's reports demonstrated that intelligence and advancement were not necessarily measured by technological sophistication or military capability. True wisdom, she argued, lay in the ability to recognize and nurture the potential for growth. In all living systems, the Valley Preserve became the first official interspecies sanctuary, protected by galactic law and managed through cooperative agreements between multiple civilizations. Sarah was appointed as the first director of interspecies harmony, a newly created position that reflected the galaxy's growing understanding of sustainable development principles. Gentle Giant became the first non-traditional diplomatic representative in galactic history, serving as a living example of cross-species cooperation. Together, they established educational programs that taught young beings from across the galaxy how to approach unfamiliar environments with respect rather than suspicion. The rescued team members, after their recovery, became advocates for the new approach to exploration and development. Commander Veltar, humbled by his experience, worked to reform military training programs to include courses on ecological sensitivity and cultural adaptation. In the end, the mission to retrieve ancient artifacts had succeeded beyond anyone's imagination. But the real treasure was not the technology they had found, but the wisdom they had gained about the true nature of strength. Sarah Martinez, the human cook who had been considered the weakest member of an elite team, had proven that sometimes the greatest power lies not in the ability to take what you want, but in the capacity to give what others need. Asterisk.